Today we're going to be talking about making better observations because I want you to be able to make good observations when you're in the lab. So look at this picture and make some observations. What are some observations about what you see? If the first thing that you saw was a face, you are not alone. Maybe some of you saw a vase. If you said a vase or face, what you did was not make an observation, but you made an interpretation. So an observation is exactly what you see. So I see a figure that maybe is 4 by 3 inches. I see that it's black along the edges, that it's white in the middle. I see that about half of that space is white and half of that space is black. All of these would be observations. So observations are what we want to make first. Interpretations we want to make second. So again, what is the difference between an observation and interpretation? An observation is what you see, an interpretation is how you see it or what it looks like to you. So the observation are just the facts. Interpretation is how you make sense of it in your world. Let's look at this picture. What do you observe? Jot down some things that you see. What are some observations you can make? So some observations that I can make are that it's black on the bottom, and this is a black and white figure. I can make a measurement that this is 6 inches tall, and maybe this is 4 inches tall. Depending on the screen that you're looking at, you might have a different measurement. I could say that we have some curvy lines here and that we have some straight lines here. So these are all observations that I could make. Now let's make an interpretation. What do you see? Usually about 75% of people, when they see this figure, they will see the young woman first. However, 25% will see the old woman first. So if you were to start your observations by saying, there's an old woman there, 75% of people would think that you're crazy. So again, you always want to start with observations, then you can add interpretations. So I'm hopeful that you can see both the young lady and the old lady now. If you can't, let me just kind of scribble so that you can see. So on the old woman, her mouth is right here, and she has an eye here, and then she has a large nose. Okay, so that's the old woman. The young woman, she has an eyelash right here, and she's looking over her shoulder, and there's her little nose, and this is a necklace that she has. So both of these figures can be seen. The point is, I want you to make observations first and then make interpretations. Both are important in science. It's important that we make sense of what our data looks like, but it's important to collect the data first. So in a chemistry experiment, collect your data, and sometimes you do have to do some experiments to help you make better observations. And hopefully those observations will be repeatable. So you should get similar results for the same experiment. And again, interpretation is analysis of your data. So looking at your data, looking to see how it makes sense to you. There are two types of observations. So I don't know if you noticed that I was making some measurements sometimes. And that's because we can do quantitative observations. And quantitative observations are descriptions based on measurements. So this would include measuring length, measuring volume, measuring time passing, maybe putting the object on a balance to take the mass, measuring pressure, or taking the temperature. So all of these are based on a measurement of some sort. The kind that doesn't use measurements is called qualitative observation. So this includes color, texture, whether it's clear or cloudy, and really we're using our senses here: hearing, feeling, tasting, seeing, smelling. In chemistry, you will never taste, and very rarely will I ask you to feel. So we are going to rely on seeing. We can smell it by wafting the fumes towards our nose, and sometimes we might use hearing. So in chemistry, we are concerned about observations and interpretations, and we're also concerned about quantitative and qualitative observations. Remember, though, that interpretation should always come last. So looking at this photo, I want you to stop the tape and make some quantitative and qualitative observations about this picture, and then you can make some interpretations. Okay, we're back. So some observations. We see that there's two scientists. We see that one scientist is holding a hammer. Another scientist has his arm raised up and he's holding what looks like to be a paper bag. We can look at the time that this is occurring. We see that there's a picture in the background. And we see the word missile written on the object that the scientist with the hammer is right by. Other observations, we can see that one scientist is wearing a tie. We can see they're both wearing lab jackets. All right, let's make some interpretations. So what are some interpretations about this? So we can say that the scientist with the hammer is perhaps hammering a nail into the missile. So observation is that there is a nail and that there is a hammer, but interpretation would be that he's actually hammering that nail into what looks like to be a missile. And then the other scientist with one hand up in the air and the bag, we might make the interpretation that he's about to pop the bag and scare the first scientist. But we don't know exactly if that's what is going to happen because it hasn't happened yet. But we can maybe interpret and maybe anticipate that that is what's going to happen next. So in science, we want to focus on the and just observe and not try to explain yet. So explanation is important, that interpretation is important, but we want to first observe. Then we want to be able to look at all the observations before we make our interpretation.